The story of Wojtek, the journey of a little cub. The sun rose slowly above the rugged mountains of Iran, spreading a crimson veil across the horizon. On the dusty roads, the wind howled as it brushed against the rocks, carrying with it a thin, haunting murmur. In the narrow alleys of a mountain village, clouds of dust swirled, stirred by the morning breeze. Amid this silence, the children of the village suddenly pointed to a small shadow stumbling into view. It was a bear cub, only a few months old. Its fur shimmered like golden honey under the sunlight, yet its round, pearl-black eyes trembled with hunger and loneliness. Its belly, hollowed by starvation, pressed inward, and its tiny nose rooted desperately in the soil for the faintest trace of food. Within its gaze lingered the unspoken longing for a mother it had already lost. And then, on that very road, a group of Polish soldiers appeared. Their uniforms bore the stains of long marches, rifles weighed heavily on their shoulders. Their faces, shadowed with fatigue, looked as though months of hardship had carved sorrow into their skin. Yet, when their eyes met the fragile cub, something shifted. For the first time in weeks, a spark of warmth flickered within them, like a traveler stumbling upon cool water in a desert. One of the soldiers knelt, pulling a small piece of bread from his pack. The cub hesitated, its nose twitching nervously, before stretching forward and clutching the bread with its oversized paws. The crunch of its chewing mixed with the soldier's laughter. In that moment, far from the thunder of cannons and the grief of endless loss, another world briefly unfolded, one of innocence, comfort, and hope. They named the cub Wojtek. In Polish, it meant the joyful warrior. Perhaps it was destiny, whispering the path that lay ahead. From that day forward, Wojtek was no longer alone. He had found a home in the hearts of soldiers.
Life with the joyful warrior.
Months passed, and Wojtek grew. No longer a fragile cub, he became a towering presence, walking shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers who had taken him in. In the mornings, when the troops lined up for drills, Wojtek would march beside them. His heavy, uneven steps made the men laugh aloud, filling the air with a sound they had nearly forgotten, the sound of joy. At night, when the campfire's flames crackled against the chill, the soldiers would gather around their enormous companion. Wojtek would curl at their feet, his thick fur a living blanket against the cold. Some stroked his head as though he were a brother. Others gazed at him with the tenderness of fathers remembering children they had left behind. In those fragile moments, Wojtek was not just an animal. He was family. Yet Wojtek was not only a source of laughter and warmth. As he grew, he began to share in the soldiers' burdens. He learned to carry crates, to move with purpose. Ammunition boxes, once unbearable to weary hands, were clutched firmly by his massive paws and loaded into trucks. At first, the men stared in disbelief, but soon they accepted it with a kind of reverence. Wojtek was no longer simply a mascot. He was a comrade in arms. Then came Monte Cassino. The mountains roared with the fury of war. The crash of artillery echoed like thunder across the valleys. Smoke blackened the sky, and exhaustion gnawed at every soldier's spirit. They struggled to haul the heavy shells and crates of ammunition through the chaos, their bodies near breaking, and then a familiar shadow emerged. Wojtek, calm and steady, lumbered through the din. With enormous strength, he clasped the artillery shells in his arms and carried them to the trucks. His every step radiated determination, as though he knew he was sharing their burden. The soldiers froze, stunned by the sight. For a heartbeat, the horror of war faded into silence. In its place stood a reminder of courage, loyalty, and an unspoken brotherhood. Wojtek was no longer just a bear, he was a soldier.
The silent farewell of a hero.
When the war finally ended, silence settled where gunfire had once ruled. The soldiers, scarred yet alive, carried home memories heavy with loss, but also with the warmth of their unlikely brother, Wojtek. As they returned to England, Wojtek sailed beside them. On the ship's deck, with the wind ruffling his thick fur, he stood like any other comrade heading home. His heavy paw, resting on the shoulders of the men, was a quiet vow. I was with you, and I will always be with you. Years later, Wojtek was placed in the Edinburgh Zoo. Behind the iron bars, he remained proud and unbowed, a soldier to the end. When his old comrades came to visit, often wearing their faded uniforms, Wojtek would rise onto his hind legs, lifting his massive paw as if to salute. The soldiers would choke back tears, their lips curling into bittersweet smiles. In that silent gesture, they saw once more the bond that had carried them through the darkest days of their lives. Though there were no more shells to carry, no more trenches to march, Wojtek's presence endured. He was remembered not as a curiosity, nor as a creature confined by iron bars, but as a hero who had carried more than ammunition. He had carried hope, laughter, and brotherhood on his mighty shoulders. And so, Wojtek's name lived on, not just in the history of Poland, not only in the records of war, but in the hearts of all who heard his story. He was a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, loyalty, friendship, and love can shine through. The joyful warrior, Wojtek, remains immortal, not in the roar of battle, but in the quiet strength of memory.